Thomas Manton, Volume 12, Complete Works, Sermons upon Romans chapter 8, Sermon number 17. If ye live after the flesh, ye shall die. Romans 8:13. The first use is information. 1. To show the lawful use of threatenings. 2. The folly of two sorts of people. 1. Of those that will rather venture this death than leave their sinful pleasures. And 2. Those that would reconcile God and the flesh and God and the world. 1. The lawful use of those threatenings. Threatenings are necessary during the law of grace. 2 arguments I shall give for the proof thereof. 1. If threatenings were needful to Adam in the state of innocency and perfection, much more are they useful now when there is such a corrupt inclination within, and so many temptations without. In the best, there is a double principle and many inordinate lusts that we need the strongest bridle and curb to suppress them. 2. If Christ came to verify God's threatenings, surely God hath some use for them now. But so it is, the devil would represent God as a liar in his comminations. Genesis 3:4, quote, Ye shall not surely die. Christ came to confute the tempter, and would die rather than the devil's reproach of God's threatenings should be found true. Surely this is to check thoughts of iniquity. The folly of two sorts of people. 1. Of those that will rather venture this death than leave their sinful pleasures and live a holy life. Carnal men think no life so happy as theirs, being escaped out of their fetters of religion and bonds of conscience, in the apostles' expression, quote, free from righteousness, Romans 6:20. Whereas the truth is, none are more miserable, for they carry it so, as if they were in love with their own death. Proverbs 8:36, quote, He that sinneth against me wrongeth his own soul, and they that hate me love death. You hazard your soul and body, and all that is near and dear to you, for a little carnal satisfaction. For the present you get nothing but the guilt of conscience, hardness of heart, and the displeasure of the eternal God, and for the future, everlasting destruction from the presence of the Lord, when the body and soul shall be cast into hell fire. Consider this before it be too late. There is no man goeth to hell or heaven, but with violence to conscience or lusts. Those that go to hell offer violence to their conscience. 2. Those that would reconcile God in the flesh and God in the world, and secure their interest in both, that hope to please the flesh and yet be happy hereafter for all that, would keep up a profession of godliness while they live in secret league with their lusts. God will not have it with the world, nor part stakes with the flesh. You cannot please the flesh and enjoy God too, for you have but one happiness. If you place it in contenting the flesh, you cannot have it in the fruition of God. Quote, Their end is destruction, whose God is their belly, and who mind earthly things, Philippians 3:19. Worldly pleasures will end in eternal torments, and so much more will your torments be, for contraries are punished with contraries. Revelation 8:7, quote, How much she hath glorified herself and lived deliciously, so much sorrow give her. Therefore, so much as you gratify the flesh, so much you endanger the soul. Will you, for a little temporal satisfaction, run the hazard of God's eternal wrath? The use the second use is to dissuade you from this course. To this end I shall lay down some motives and some means. 1. The motives are these. You think the flesh is your friend, do all that you can to please it, whereas indeed it is your greatest enemy. That it is one of your enemies is clear by that place where all our enemies appear abreast, Ephesians 2 and 3, quote, there is the course of this world, the prince of the power of the air, and our own flesh. If there were never a devil to tempt or an example to follow, yet, quote, out of the heart proceed, Matthew 15:19, murder, adultery, theft, blasphemy. Among other things he reckoneth up murder, which striketh at the life of man, and blasphemy, which striketh at the being of God. If the devil should stand by and say nothing, there is enough within us to put us upon all manner of evil. Other enemies would do us no harm without our own flesh. Corruption may be irritated by God's law, Romans 7:9. We may be tempted to sin by Satan, 1 Corinthians 7:5, encouraged to sin by the example of the evil conversations of others, Isaiah 9:16, enticed to sin by the baits of the world, 2 Peter 1:4, but only inclined to sin by our own flesh. And at length no man is a sinner but by his own consent, James 1:14. Quote, he is drawn away by his own lust and enticed. In vain do temptations knock at the door. If it were nothing within to make answer and admit them, if we could keep ourselves from ourselves, there were no danger from what is without. As Balaam by all his curses and charms could do nothing against the Israelites, till he found a way to corrupt them by whoredom, and by whoredom to draw them to idolatry, and so found a means to destroy them by themselves. So it is the domestic enemy, the flesh within us, which maketh us a prey to Satan, and doth us mischief upon all occasions. It is the flesh that distracts us in holy duties with vain thoughts, and abateth our fervors, and maketh us idle in our callings, that tempts us to sensuality and inordinate delight when we are repairing nature, and returneth our table into a snare, so that nature is rather oppressed than refreshed for God's service. It is the flesh maketh us forget our great end and the eternal interests of our immortal souls. 2. The more you indulge the flesh, the more it is your enemy, and the more your slavery and bondage is increased, so that still you grow more brutish, forgetful of God, and unapt for any spiritual use. By using to please the flesh, you increase its desires, and know not at length how to deny it and displease it, by being made a wanton, and groweth stubborn and contumacious. The more you gratify the flesh, the more inordinate it groweth, and the more unreasonable things it craveth at your hands. Therefore you must hold a hard hand upon it at first. Though through too much indulgence the reins are loosened to sin, and the enemy is heartened, and our liberty is every day more and more lost. Solomon was fearfully corrupted when he withheld not his heart from any joy, Ecclesiastes 2:10. This brought him to a lawless excess, and to fall so foully as he did. If you give corrupt nature its full scope, and use pleasures with too free a license, the heart is insensibly corrupted, and our very diseases and distempers become our necessities. Solomon saith, Proverbs 29:21, quote, he that delicately bringeth up a servant shall have him become a son at length. He will no more know his condition, but grow bold and troublesome. We are all the worse for license. Therefore, unless natural desires feel fetters and prudent restraints, they grow unruly, and therefore, that the flesh may not grow masterly, it is good to bridle it. To deny ourselves nothing, bringing a greater snare upon the soul, and distempers are more rooted. 1 Corinthians 6:12, quote, I will not be brought under the power of any creature. A man is brought into vassalage and bondage and cannot help it. 3. The engagement that is upon Christians to abhor carnal living. By their solemn baptismal vow, which obligeth us to take this yoke of Christ upon ourselves, even to tame and subdue the flesh, Colossians 3:3, quote, mortify your members which are upon the earth. All are strictly bound to mortify the deeds of the body under pain of damnation, kings as well as subjects, nobles and base. For God is no acceptor of persons. No man of what degree soever can presume an exemption from the duty or hope of a dispensation. Hope for a dispensation. We are all debtors, and this duty taketh place as soon as we come to the use of reason, and all then begin to feel corruption and imperfection of nature, and we are bound to look after the cure of it, and to use all Christ's healing means that it may be effected. Then we begin to perceive the enemies against whom we are to fight, and a necessity is laid upon us of killing them, or being killed by them. It is our great fault that we made conscience of our solemn vow no sooner. Surely we should no longer dispute it now. First Peter 4:3, quote, for the time past of our life may suffice us to have wrought the will of the Gentiles when we lived in lasciviousness, lusts, excess of wine, reveling, banquetings, abominable idolatries. But set about the work and undertake the battle against the devil, the world, and the flesh. Your first enemy is the old man, and it is the last, for it is not extinguished in us until death. Therefore, as soon as we pass out of infancy into youth, we must look upon ourselves under this obligation, not to live after the flesh, but after the Spirit, to weaken the corruption of nature more and more. There was but one man, and no more, who was first good and afterwards bad, and that was the first Adam. Another there is, who was never bad and always good, and that was Christ Jesus, the second Adam, our Lord, blessed forever. Of all the rest, none proved good that was not sometimes bad. The apostle saith, quote, first that which was natural, and afterwards that which is spiritual. It is true, here first we put off a corrupt nature before we are renewed. The duty lieth upon us by our baptismal engagement though Christ supplieth the grace. 4. The qualities of a Christian, or his condition in the world, engageth him not to live after the flesh. I shall mention two, as they are strangers and pilgrims, or as they are racers and wrestlers. First, sometimes it is pressed upon them as they are strangers and pilgrims, who have no continued abode. 1 Peter 2:11, quote, I beseech you, as pilgrims and strangers, abstain from fleshly lusts, which war against your soul. You are, or should be, traveling into another country, where there are spirits of just men made perfect, and where even this body of ours will become a spiritual body. And for you to please the flesh is contrary to your Christian hopes. Nothing so unsuitable for them that are going to Canaan as to hanker after the flesh pots of Egypt. Nothing is so contrary to our profession, and breedeth such an unreadiness to depart out of the world, as these vain delights. And therefore, if you be strangers and pilgrims, you should not lust after worldly things, lest you forget and forfeit your great hopes. Secondly, you are racers or wrestlers. 1 Corinthians 9:24. Know ye not that they which run in a race run all, but one receiveth the prize? So run that ye may obtain. They that are exercised in the Isthmian games had a prescribed set diet, both for quality and quantity, and had their rule chalked out to them. They knew their work and their reward. So 5:7, but I keep under my body, and bring it into subjection, lest that by any means, when I have preached to others, I myself should be found a castaway. That is, denied himself those liberties which otherwise he might enjoy, having prescribed to others the way of striving and getting the victory. They, for an oaken or olive crown, dieted themselves, kept themselves from all things which should hurt them, or disable them in the race or combat. And should we conquer every appetite, and have an eternal crown of glory in view and pursuit? Our danger is greater if we should miscarry and miss it. Theirs, the loss of a little vain glory; ours, of eternal glory. Therefore we should strive that we be not found unworthy to receive it. There the victory was uncertain; here all that are runners may be sure of the crown. Amen. 5. Consider the malignant influence of the flesh, and how pernicious it is to the soul. If it were a small thing we spake to you about, you might refuse to give ear, but it is in a case of life and death, and that not temporal but eternal. We can tell you of many present and temporal inconveniences that may come by the flesh, the body, the part gratified, as in many oppressed by it. Proverbs 5:11, Thou shalt mourn at last when thy flesh and body is consumed. It bewrayeth you to such sins as suck your bones and devour your strength, and give your years to the cruel, to such enormities and scandalous practices as bring infamy and a blot upon your name. Pleasing the flesh maketh one turn a drunkard, and the very sin carrieth its own punishment with it. A second, a wanton; a third, a glutton; a fourth, a hard-hearted worldling. And all these sins waste the conscience, and debase the body, and spend our wit, time, strength, and estates. But we have a more powerful argument to present to you. It will be the eternal loss and ruin of your souls. There will a day come when you shall be called to an account for all your vain delights and pleasures. Ecclesiastes 11:9, Rejoice, O young man, in thy youth, and let thine heart cheer thee in the day of thy youth, and walk in the ways of thine own heart, and in the sight of thine own eyes. But know that for all these things God will bring thee to judgment. The young man is cited before the tribunal of God, and we think somewhat must be allowed to that age before men have learned by experience to contemn pleasures, and the young man is spoken to in his own dialect. Let his wanton and wandering eye inflame the lusts of his heart, and smother his conscience by all manner of sensual delight, yet at length he will know the folly of this to his bitter cost. These things, which are now so pleasing to the senses, shall gnaw and sting his conscience, when God, whom he now forgetteth, shall bring him into the judgment, and he shall have nothing to plead for his brutish folly. 6. What vile unthankfulness it is, and a great abuse of that liberty which we have by Christ. Galatians 5:13. Ye are called to liberty, only use it not as an occasion to the flesh. We have a great liberty to use our worldly comforts with respect to God's glory, and as encouragements of God's service, and for the sweetening of our pilgrimage, but it is strangely perverted when we use these things to please the flesh. You turn it into a bondage, and offer a great abuse to Jesus Christ. Surely he never died to promote the power of sin, or gave us these comforts to defeat the ends of his death? Was he a man of sorrows that we might live in pleasure? Did he suffer in the flesh to purchase us liberty to please the flesh? Or die for sin to give sin the mastery? Did the Lord vouchsafe these comforts that we might dishonor his name or undo our own souls? 2. Means to come out of this estate and course of sin. I shall give you a few directions. 1. To those that never pretended to the spiritual and heavenly life, and are as yet to be drawn out of the common apostasy and defection of mankind to God. All that I shall say to them is to observe checks of conscience and motions of the Spirit, in what help is given to weaken the flesh. 1. Checks of conscience, however occasioned, either by a lapse into some sin, which is wont to scourge the soul with some remorse. Matthew 27:4, quote, or saying, quote, I have sinned in betraying innocent blood. Conscience working after the fact or by the conviction of the word. Acts 24:25, quote, and as he reasoned of righteousness and temperance and judgment to come, Felix trembled, and doth not smother these checks, that breedeth atheism and hardness of heart. Suppose one dissolutely bent, and yet upon some loathsome concomitants, I don't know that word, I have to look that one up, which follow his riot and intemperance, bringeth to be troubled, or beginneth to be troubled. God's providence is to be observed as well as his own. This is a kind of softening his heart. If he revert to his old frame, the man is the worse. No iron so hard as that which hath been heated often. Water, after it hath been heated by the fire, congealeth the sooner after it is taken off. If he doth not take notice of God's warnings, his soul is more unapt to be wrought to repentance. Yea, God in justice may deprive him of those common helps. Hosea 4:17, quote, let him alone, or give him up to his own heart's counsels. It is dangerous not to make use of those intervals of reason and sober thoughts which arise in our minds. 2. To the motions of the Holy Spirit, when he cometh to recover you from the flesh to God, and you are troubled not only with remorse for actual and heinous sins, but about your eternal estate, and are haunted with thoughts of the other world, and urged to resolve upon the heavenly life. Surely when the waters are stirred, we should put in for a cure. John 5. When he draweth, we should run. Cantilevers 1:4, or Ecclesiastes. When he knocketh, we should open. Revelation 3:20, and not obstruct the work of godliness, but seriously employ our thoughts about it. Acts 16:14, quote, whose heart the Lord opened, that she attended unto all the things that were spoken by Paul. We should not rebel against the motions of the Spirit, lest we grieve our sanctifier, and he forsake us, because we forsook him, and our hearts be hardened in the carnal course. Briefly, God doth all in our first conversion. Yet these three things lie upon us. First, to observe the touches of God's punishing and chastening hand, reclaiming us from our wanderings. Psalm 119:59. Before I was afflicted, I went astray. Secondly, to reflect upon the motions of his Spirit to draw us out of this estate, that we may not resist the Holy Ghost. Acts 7:51. Thirdly, to examine every day what advantage the Spirit hath gotten against the flesh, how the interests of it are weakened, its lusts checked, its acts restrained, Galatians 5:16, Every one that doth seriously mind the business of his salvation cannot but see these things of great advantage to his spiritual estate, and there is no great difficulty in them to the serious soul that hath a mind to be saved. 2. To those that seem to be recovered, and have a care of the spiritual life, that they may not revert to this bondage, that the work may be more thoroughly wrought in them. 1. Look to the mind. Take heed there be not flesh there, for the fleshly mind is a great enemy to godliness. Romans 8:7, quote, the carnal mind is enmity to God, and it is a low, poor mind, blinded with the love of present things. James 3:15, quote, the wisdom that descendeth not from above is earthly, sensual, devilish. It hindereth us from discerning the reality of our hopes, and from having a true sense of our duty impressed upon our hearts. 1 Corinthians 2:14, quote, but the natural man receiveth not the things of the Spirit of God, for they are foolishness to him, neither can he know them, because they are spiritually discerned. And from applying our true particular case, either in judging of our estate or in guiding of our actions, it is strange to see how the world, or the delusion of the flesh, do blind very knowing men, and how unacquainted they are with their own hearts, or unable to discern their duty in plain cases, when the performance of it is likely to be pleasing to the flesh. What strange disguises it puts upon temptation, and how they wriggle and distinguish themselves out of their duty, when either God must be disobeyed or the flesh displeased. The flesh is always partial for itself, therefore get a sound mind, and this spiritual discerning. 2. Look to the heart, that there be no flesh there. Sinful inclinations must be observed and mortified. Satan doth observe them, and shall not we? He seeth which way the tree leaneth, what kind of diet the soul distempers crave, and suiteth his temptations accordingly. As the skillful angler suiteth his bait as the fishes will take it, every month, 1 Corinthians 7:5, quote, lest Satan tempt you for your incontinency. He hath a bait of preferment for Absalom, for he is ambitious; a bait of pleasure for Samson, for he is voluptuous; a bait of money for Judas, for he is covetous. Thus will he furnish them with temptations answerable to their inclinations. A man by temper voluptuous esteems not much profit, nor an earthworm pleasure, nor an ambitious man much either of them, but honor and reputation, and a great place. Now it is sad that our enemies should know our temper better than ourselves. Your uprightness and faithfulness to God is seen in weakening your particular inclination to sin. Psalm 18:23, quote, I was also upright before him, and kept myself from mine iniquity. Observe the decay of your master's sin, and other things will come on the more easily. Fight not against small or great, but the king lust, the domineering sin. Satan is the more discouraged when we can deny our domineering lusts. As Samson's strength lay in his locks, so doth the strength of sin in one lust more than another. Every man knoweth his darling commonly, but that which is our great care is to wean our hearts from it. Herod raged when John the Baptist touched his Herodias. Felix trembled when Paul touched his bribery and intemperance. And the young man goeth away sad when Christ discovered his worldliness. Mark 10:22. We have all our tender parts which cannot endure should be touched. But now, when you are willing to part with this sin, pray, Strive and watch against it. Grow in the contrary grace. It showeth your self-denial and sincerity. You will not spare your Isaac. Well then, see that no worldly thing be too near and dear to you, and that God hath a greater interest in your heart than the flesh or anything that belongeth to it. 3. Let not the senses cast off the government of reason, and be the ruling power of your souls. They were not made to govern, but to be governed, and to be subjected to God and reason. Man, by the fall, is inverted, Titus 3:3, quote, hateful and hating one another. Man in his right constitution should be thus governed. The understanding of the conscience, or the understanding in conscience prescribed to the will, and the will according to the right reason in conscience moveth the affections move the bodily spirits and members of the body. But by corruption all is inverted and changed. Pleasure affects the senses corrupt the fancy the bodily spirits, and they the affections, and the affections by their violence and impetuous inclination to forbidden things move the will, and the will, yielding, blindeth the mind, and so man is carried headlong into his own destruction. The feet are where the head should be. Well then, you must guide the senses, as Job made a covenant with his eyes, Job 31:1, and David prayeth, Psalm 119:37, quote, turn away mine eyes from beholding vanity. They let in objects, and objects stir up thoughts, and thoughts affections. Matthew 5:28. Now, take heed they do not grow masterly. If they transmit temptations and stir up evil motions, crush the scorpion on the wound. 4. Keep up a readiness for your work, which is to obey the will of God. It argueth some prevalency of the flesh, when your duty beginneth to grow troublesome and uneasy. Therefore the spirit, or the better part, cannot so readily produce its operation. The soul in the right temper doth willingly and cheerfully obey God, 1 John 5:3, quote, this is the love of God, that we keep his commandments, and his commandments are not grievous. In Psalm 48, quote, I delight to do thy will, O my God. Thy will is in my heart, or thy law is in my heart. In Psalm 112:1, quote, blessed is the man that feareth the Lord, and that delighteth greatly in his commandments. Therefore, it is time for you to check the flesh and overcome it, lest further mischief increase upon you. 5. Refer all things to your ultimate end, and consider whether what you do will hinder or further you therein. For all things are to be regarded and valued as they conduce to God's service in your salvation. Ecclesiastes 2:2. What doth it? 1 Corinthians 10:31, quote, whether ye eat or drink, or whatsoever ye do, let all be done to the glory of God. Be true to your scope. 6. Take heed of the servitude and bondage which the flesh is wont to bring upon the soul where it reigneth. It maketh men very slaves. The heart groweth weak, and lust strong. Ezekiel 16:31. They are not under the government of the Spirit, but under the tyranny of their fleshly lusts, doing whatever it commandeth, be it never so base, foolish, and hurtful. If anger provoke them to revenge, they must fight, kill, and slay, and hazard all their worldly interests for anger's sake, or at least cannot forgive injuries for God's sake. If filthy lusts send them to lewd women, Away they go like a fool to the correction of the stocks. And though they dishonor God, ruin their estates, stain their fame, hazard their lives, yet lust will have it so, and they must obey. If covetousness say they must be rich, however they get it, they rise early and go to bed late, eat the bread of sorrow, and pierce through themselves with many cares. Yea, make no question of right or wrong, trample conscience under foot, cast the fear of God behind their backs, and all because their imperious mistress, ambition, urgeth them to it. If envy and malice bid Cain kill his brother, he will break all bonds of nature to do it. If ambition did Absalom rebel against his father, and kill him too, it shall be done, or he shall want his will. If covetousness did Achan, or bid Achan take the wedge of gold, he will do it, though he know it be a cursed thing. If it bid Judas betray his Lord and Master, though he knew if he should do it, it had been better if he had never been born, yet he will do it. Thus they are not at their own command to do what reason and conscience inclineth them to do. If sensible of their bondage, they would think of God and the world to come and the state of their souls, lust will not permit it. If to break off this sensual course they are not able, they are servants of corruption. Some God hangeth up in chains of darkness for a warning to the rest of the world of the power of drunkenness, gluttony, avarice, and wretched worldliness. Yea, of every carnal man it is true. John 8:34, quote, whosoever committeth sin is the servant of sin. Therefore, if the slavery and imperious disease begin to grow upon you, the flesh hath prevailed very far, and you need more to look to it, and that betimes. Third use. Here is ground for trying your estate before God. It is a question you ought often seriously to put. Quote, shall I be saved, or shall I be damned? If you have any spark of conscience left you, when you are sick and dying, you will put it with anxiousness and trembling of heart. Poor soul, whither art thou now going? It is better to put it now, while you have opportunity to correct your error, if hitherto you have gone wrong. We see in worldly things, men would fain to know their destiny. The king of Babylon stood upon the head of the ways to make divination. We would fain to know what God hath hidden in the womb of futurity. No destiny deserves to be known so much as this, not whether I shall be poor or rich, good success in this enterprise or bad. It is not of so great moment. These distinctions do not outlive time, but cease at the grave's mouth. But it is a question of greater moment, whether eternally miserable or eternally happy. It is foolish curiosity to inquire into other things, when we have a good God to trust to, but chiefly importeth us to consider whether we are in the way to salvation or damnation. Nothing will sooner determine this great question than this text, quote, if ye live after the flesh, ye shall die. But if ye through the Spirit do mortify the deeds of the body, ye shall live. The latter branch we shall examine afterwards. Now for the first clause. 1. Some live in defiance of the Spirit, cherish the flesh, fulfill the works of the flesh. Galatians 5:19. It is no subtle matter to find them out. They declare their sins as Sodom, while they are drinking, whoring, sporting, quarreling, scoffing at godliness. 2. Others please the flesh in a more cleanly manner, but have no due regard to that spirit and eternal happiness which lieth in the enjoyment of God. Though their carriage be blameless and separated from the gross pollutions of the world, They care not whether God be pleased or displeased, honored or dishonored, angry or reconciled. And besides, the works of the flesh are not always interpreted in the gross sense, but according to the scale of the sanctuary. When he saith adultery, fornication, murder are the works of the flesh, we must not only think of the gross acts, but of the very first seeds of these sins, the secret inclinations and desires of the flesh in this kind. Matthew 5:27 and 28. So, lasciviousness, not the sinful attempt only, but every motion of tongue, heart, senses, by which the eyes and ears, the soul, and consciences of ourselves and others may be polluted to idolatry, anger, inordinate affection of the heart to any creature. Ephesians 5:5. So by murder, not only when it proceedeth to blood, but hatred, variance, strife, heresies. Matthew 5:21, 22. So, in short, emulation and affectation of applause. Galatians 5:26. 3. The prevalence of the divine or carnal principle must determine our condition. Now its reign is known. 1. By our savor, relish, and taste, Romans 8:5. For every man's gust is according to his constitution, which breedeth oblection or pleasure of mind. Now, when we savor only the things of the flesh, that if it be pleased, quiets us in the want of other things, contents us in the neglect of God and his service, that we have no appetite after, or savor, or relish any sweetness but in fleshly things, this is an ill sign. 2. By our course of walking, which is often insisted on in this chapter. There may be some blemishes in God's children, some unevenness of obedience through the relics of the flesh, but their main constant course, for which they labor and strive, is to approve themselves to God, and to be accepted with God, and to live in obedience to the motions of his sanctifying Spirit. But where there is a carelessness in the heavenly life, the influence of the fleshly life is most discovered in all our actions. 3. By our tendency and scope. When the heart is turned to or alienated from God, the flesh reigneth if the world turn our hearts from him, and the flesh be pleased before him, and we mind our own things. We are lovers of pleasures more than lovers of God.